From the city of broad shoulders, this is Chicago Unscripted with CBS News Chicago's Joe Donlan.
Data is the new currency. You've probably heard that phrase used to describe the enormous value of data in the digital age. Much like currency, it's collected, processed, and used to create value and inform decisions. It's usually connected to business, but as you're about to hear, there is another, perhaps equally important use in politics. Joshua Doss lives it every day. He's a political data analyst, pollster, and consultant for Hit Strategies, a public opinion research company whose website says, behind every number, there's a story. On the side, Josh shares that currency for free on his social media platforms, including Instagram, where he has grown an audience of more than 500,000 followers. At a time when political views seem to be driven by party or personality, the facts, the numbers, the data, if you will, can sometimes get lost or perhaps just ignored. It's been said that data doesn't lie, and that's where Joshua tries to focus, to enlighten, to educate, to promote mindset expansion. He's just 30 years old, grew up in Chicago, played college basketball at the University of South Dakota, and got his master's in economics from Purdue. We had a lot to chop up, from tariffs to the Epstein files, and I should point out we recorded this the night the House voted to release the files. Trump hadn't signed it yet, but that leads us to more data about everything from politicians to populism, socialism, the Mamdani win in the New York City mayor's race, and more. The night before we recorded this episode, I had CNN on, and there he was, mixing it up with Scott Jennings, widely considered one of the top conservative analysts on TV. And that's where we start. Here's Joshua Doss. Josh, it is so great to have you on. I flipped on CNN last night, and man, there you were right in the thick of it.
Yeah, it was a little wild. Every show gets a little wild like that, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're sitting next to Scott Jennings. How does that work? Do you get to pick where you sit?
No,
I bet.
They just put you next. They obviously try to mix it up. They got a couple of folks who are left of center, right of center, and I think they try to make sure we're next to each other for those like tight shots and those tense moments. And yeah, we had some last night for sure.
Yeah, you did. I thought it was. Do you have Scott's phone number? Are you guys like buddies off the air?
Scott actually like is a he. I think he's a nice guy. Like I disagree with a lot of his. I disagree with a lot of his politics, but okay. I do think he's like a nice dude. I am not that close with him, I will admit, but I think generally he's a nice man.
He's very good at what he does.
Yeah.
I do wish he would call more, I think, balls and strikes as opposed to being just so rigid for the right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's whip smart. I think he understands very well, like the media placement, right? So like, I think he puts out content, whether he's on that show or another, that like gives talking points to people who want to just argue from one position. And like, I think, there's two types of ways you can look at politics. People who let their truths tell them what their politics should be, and people who let their politics tell them what their truth should be. And I think Scott kind of starts from like, okay, what does the party think on this? And that is how I will explain it to be true. And I wish he didn't do that as much.
Wow, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Do you think in the end, then, Josh, this is part of my problem with cable TV and cable news in particular, these opinion shows, is that it's become sort of outrage TV. And as much as we can say it's awesome that we're debating each other and that we're talking to each other, do you think it's I guess, productive, because in many ways, to your point, it's really not about getting to the truth. It's about getting to a point.
Yeah. I toil with this. I'll be honest. I'll be transparent. As a person who goes on these shows, I think the way that we debate is often disingenuous. And I would like for us to get back to discussion shows where we can actually stop and respond to certain points, and where people aren't so partisan all the time. And that's not like a prerequisite for their position on the show. So,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was in that world for a little while. And I made the mistake of wanting people to feel smarter at the end of my hour, not angrier. And that's just not how that world works. My takeaway in the end was, no one's happy unless someone's unhappy. And if they're unhappy, get them on the show.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's at least been the way that it's been for the last couple of, I think, years in Incline. But I don't know. I do think, and I try to do this with my content, I do think that there is still room for people who want to just educate and who just want to put the facts out there. The majority of my day job is data driven. And I think that there's something that people on the left and the right do just kind of respect about the fact that I'm just saying these are what the data are saying. So I think there's room, but we have to do it in an interesting way, I guess I'll say.
Data doesn't lie. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Although I also remember someone saying that data is a little bit like a bikini. It shows a lot, but not everything. And you can kind of read into what you want of some of the data, but it's hard to argue with it, is it not?
Yeah, no, I think I've heard that phrase before. I think it's absolutely right. But it is hard when something is so objective, it is hard to argue with it. I think a good example is what we were talking about last night. The release of the Epstein files, it had somewhere upwards of 78-79% of America's support. So the House and the Senate had to acquiesce. How can you go and block something that almost 80% of Americans are saying that they want? And we kind of saw our representative democracy work well for us yesterday. And you can't say that every day. So happy about that.
Well, I heard someone on Bill Maher's show the other day, I think it was Tom Friedman from the New York Times, who said that it's become a huge industry to make us angry and stupid. And I wonder what you think about living in a data world where people are so hesitant and reluctant to believe the data.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why, I have a lot of disdain for a lot of folks in the Trump administration, but this is at the core of my disdain for JD Vance, because he is an academic in a lot of ways, or at least was, right? I believe he was an Ivy League guy.
Right.
And he has been pretty intentional on making people not believe experts. He did it a lot in the debate with Walls, where he's I think he actually had a quote where he said, well, why should we believe the experts? Why should we believe the academics when you were one of those people? And I think he knows that there's a growing disdain that comes from the working class person. Only 30% of America goes to college, right? And there's this disdain that they have with how I think the world of politics and legislation have used language to make it exclusionary. They've taken very simple things and wrapped them up in complicated language. I think working class people know that. And so there's this growing disdain. And I think people like JD Vance really feed into it and say, yeah, the experts are. How do they know? Maybe the earth is flat. I think it's really, really dangerous.
Well, this is where we get to a phrase that we really hadn't heard until fairly recently, and that's gaslighting. And I think part of it and again, just in the name of fairness here, I guess we can say both sides do this, but, it's a matter of looking at something, especially for you in the data world, that says it's green, and then someone else looks at it and says, no, it's red.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it first of all, it absolutely does happen on both sides of the aisle. And I think even us acknowledging that right now in this conversation is so important, because it allows people to kind of put down their partisan walls and maybe let the data be the data. But no, it's infuriating, because that is why we have the scientific method. That is why we have representative samples that have been pressure tested. That is why we look at margins of error, right? And we do all of this so that we can put out statistics that you can trust. And so when people just look at those statistics that come from the result of a lot of intentional thought and say, it is disheartening for sure.
Yeah, I guess, which leads me to a really, philosophical and difficult question that I don't know that I'll ever understand. And that is, how in the world did we get to this point, Josh?
Some will probably say social media.
Yeah.
Maybe historians will say if you look at like the cycle, like our 100 years, 170-year cycles, that we're actually right on track to have some type of extreme distrust in societies, right? Like
Right.
um globalization, I think. But I mean, maybe the easiest answer is just I think there's just some things that we haven't reckoned with as a country. Like we haven't reckoned with how this country started. We haven't reckoned with how we built the economic prosperity off the backs of, indentured servitude and a lot of marginalized communities. We just kind of decided to stop and move on.
That's
And I think there's just a building tension for a lot of people. And it's not just race. I think there's a class tension here where people understand that they're being screwed from the rich and the well connected, and we just haven't really reckoned with it. We just keep saying, we'll just pollute more, we'll just make larger businesses, and I think it's backfiring.
Yeah, what bothers me, and I guess what worries me, is that the days of us all rowing in the same direction seem to be gone. And I feel like we're doing the work of our enemies to ourselves, to their delight.
Yeah, I'll just like I agree with what you're saying. I'll just have like a slight pushback. A lot of our enemies are homogenous. A lot of our enemies don't have to deal with the diversity that comes with the big tents that we have built in this country. So like we're gonna have a little internal disagreement, internal friction, because we have so many different people with so many different perspectives. And like that's also the thing that makes us great as a country. But you're absolutely right. If we can't figure out how to be better than the bitterness of our politics, then we will absolutely start doing the bidding of our enemies for them.
That's a great way to put it. Let's put that on hold for just a second, because I want to get back into your background and your Chicago roots. You got a master's in economics from Purdue. Did you ever think this was going to lead to CNN, for crying out loud?
No, I mean, my undergrad was poli sci. I always was, I don't want to say always, but like the sophomore year of college, I started getting interested in politics. And I was very inspired by Barack Obama, being a Chicago kid. He was our senator here. He was in the state Senate. He ran for the House and he was our senator. And then I remember when he won, just like watching him speak at Grant Park, thinking that he was a deity. Like, this is me at like 8, 9 years old. I'm like, this man is not real. Like, this is insane. And so his ability to communicate really complicated thoughts in ways that like my very blue collar union father could understand, and the people around my neighborhood could understand, inspired me. So I did feel like I wanted to at least have a knack for communication, but I didn't think I was going to end up on TV and things like that,
Yeah.
But it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you do this intentionally. I mean, you have 500,000 followers on Instagram, and many of your posts are done in a tank top, just sitting on the steps in your apartment there. And it seems to me like that is intentional. Is it not? Just this is the simplicity of what you're trying to do, which is another thing I respect in your Instagram game, because you promote, as one person wrote, I read in a comment, you promote mindset expansion. Think harder.
Ooh, I like that.
I did too. That's why I wrote it down.
I gotta pay whoever said that. Yeah, no, to your earlier point about me just being in a tank top or just being around the house. Honestly, when I started, I was just making videos. Actually, I was living in Denver at the time, and I would just make videos when I was walking around after work. And I didn't think I needed to be that polished because nobody was paying attention. And so then as I started growing, I was like, oh, I got to get a really nice camera, or I got to get a clearer mic. And one thing I noticed is like the more I went down that path, the less personable it felt to people. And the videos didn't do as well. So I went back to the corded headphones and the tank top t-shirts and the regular iPhone camera.
Well, I do think, though, it is a great example of the kind of content people are hungry for, and that is just information. and clarity and something to ponder, something to think about. I don't know. Have you found in your posts that most people who are following you or interacting with you are in agreement with you, or do you find yourself sort of debating some of the folks who are seeing you come across their feeds?
I don't find myself interacting with people who don't agree with me as often as I was in the beginning. When I first started, I had a lot of people who were like, hey, I see it this way, I see it that way. And I think now, and this is not something I like, I think now the platforms have found ways to purify people's algorithms. And I do think that a lot of my content now goes to people who are probably have a predisposition to agree with what I'm saying. And so one of the things that I'm really trying to do to break that on social media is using my stories to kind of pilot contrary ideas, right? And see, when I put it on my story, see how people respond to it before I put it on my main feed, just see if people, how they react to it before we kind of put it out there on the big post. But I do think that is a problem. I wish more of my content was getting to people who just had a fundamental disagreement with me.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is your purpose here, Josh, to educate people or to debate them and try to change their minds, or is that simplifying it too much?
I don't think I can change people's minds. We're in a time period where I think it's going to take a little bit more than just like a video or so, mainly because there are people who are in echo chambers, and then there are people who are in the epistemic bubbles. Epistemic bubbles are the people who I'm going for. They just haven't run into the right information. Once they do, the bubble pops.
They're open to it.
They're open to it. They just haven't run into it. And so this is why, one of the reasons why, I still talk about sports on my page. I still talk about comedy. I still talk about all these other things.
Right.
Because the hope is that I end up on people's platforms who are pretty news avoidant. They're politics avoidant. And they maybe are harboring some beliefs that just are anti-scientific, that are just not in line with what actually happened in the House or the Senate or the president. And if I make that video, it might just pop that bubble, hopefully.
Well, let's go back to your Chicago beginnings. I'm curious how you mentioned the impact Obama had on you. I'm wondering what the Chicago experience did to shape you as a youngster. Where did you grow up?
Grew up on the west side of Chicago, Austin, North Avenue in Austin. I think the Chicago shaped my personality in every single way. I mean, and anybody who knows me will say it. I think there's a certain level of toughness you have to even approach Chicago politics. And there is a BS meter that I think that we develop here, because so much of our politics is actually entrenched in, not even left or right. It is just, we've had a lot of mayors and congressmen and aldermen try to BS their people. And I think I've kind of built up that meter from this city.
You had another post. I think you like to post about several things, not just politics, but the politics are certainly landing for you. I saw another one where you used data to talk about crime and your grandma, Hattie, who lives in Inglewood. And I thought that was something that is worth touching on, because I've interviewed folks who've looked at certain situations on the South and West Side. And personally, I feel like if you don't live in these areas, too often it's out of sight, out of mind. And too often people think we can just police our way out of this. And that's not what the data shows.
Yeah, that's not what the data show. And this is the point I was trying to make in that video, to someone who's not entrenched in the data, they might have that feeling. That's how my grandma was like, bring more cops. Why not? G Herbo, he's a rapper from Chicago who is now thinking differently about his relationship with gang violence. And he's saying, yeah, I like that Trump is bringing in the National Guard, because the perspective they're coming from is like, I've seen the violence, I've seen how bad it gets, and police must equal more safety. It makes sense in theory.
Sure.
If police were what we wanted them to be, it would probably be true. But the truth is, the community violence intervention programs that Mayor Brandon had been implementing had a correlative relationship with the reduction in crime that we saw. We had the safest summer on record, I believe, this year.
Right.
And that was a direct result to those mental health services and employment programs for kids.
Have you done much research locally on the mayor, for example? He seems to be, in the polling that I see, unpopular, but at the same time, to your point, he can definitely hang his hat on what's happened with crime.
Yes, I've worked with the mayor. I've done some polling for the mayor. And it's funny, right? When we went into the field with our first poll, it was right before Trump put the National Guard or ICE and all that stuff in the city. And he was, he didn't have a high popularity rating. But it hasn't increased because that media moment has actually given a lot of people or given him a lot of opportunities to talk about the reductions in crime. And there's this weird thing that happens. We see it in qualitative research more than quant, where people get so used to saying like, yeah, this place is so dangerous. And you ask them, when was the last time that like you saw any danger or like you saw a break-in or somebody was a victim of a crime? And they think about it. And it's like, it actually hasn't been a while since it's touched my personal life. They're responding to things they're seeing on the news.
Sure.
Very like salacious, like
we just had the woman who was set on fire the other night on the Blue Line,
Yeah. And I don't want to diminish those things. Those things are happening, but my broader point is that Mayor Johnson got an opportunity from Trump to actually, on the national stage, talk about the reductions in crime that people actually were already living in and maybe didn't realize that they were living in.
You think Trump's actions have helped Johnson?
In a way, yeah. I mean, if I'm just being a political hack, yeah, his favorabilities have gone up significantly, double digits, since he's got an opportunity to position himself as a strong opposition to a fascist dictator. Yeah, yeah.
All right. Obviously, the topical stuff is really interesting. That's why I wanted to have you on, Josh. But I do want to touch just a little bit more, and then we'll move on to some of the issues and the topical questions of the day, because there's so much to chop up. But how you ended up at South Dakota? How did you decide to go there? You were obviously a good basketball player. Did you have other options? What was the decision that went into South Dakota?
Yeah, I mean, they offered me a full ride. I had committed to Tennessee State. I was going to play there, and then the coaching staff got fired. The coach that was recruiting me got fired. And I was like, where am I going to go? South Dakota was good. They were in the summit, and they had gotten really close to winning their conference tournament and going to the national tournament. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. It was actually a no-brainer. They had just made a new arena. It's one of those states where they don't have a professional sports team. So you're kind of like the celebrity.
Okay.
So it was a good time. Yeah.
So when did you decide that basketball was not, you weren't going to make it in the NBA and you better come up with another plan?
Yeah, actually I got injured my junior year. I had to sit out the whole year. And that's when I got real reflective about like, what am I doing in my life? I love this sport. My older brother played Division I as well. My younger brother is currently a professional basketball player. And so, it was in our genes, but I was like, well, I want to do a little more than just go play a little pro and then coach a little basketball. And, it's a typical story, but I was in a poli-sci class and that professor really made it interesting for me. And that kind of set it off. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first time you crossed my Instagram feed was your post explaining logical fallacies. And I just loved it because I had spoken with a logic class in college about just this thing. And it was fascinating to me, partly because the media is a great place to learn about this. And you used the example of George Stephanopoulos interviewing J.D. Vance.
The White House border czar Tom Homan was recorded on an FBI surveillance tape in September 2024, accepting $50,000 in cash. Did he keep that money or give it back?
George, you've covered the story ad nauseum. Tom Homan did not take a bribe. It's a ridiculous smear. And the reason you guys are going after Tom Homan so aggressively is because he's doing the job of enforcing the law.
What was caught on the tape, you're saying right now you don't know whether or not he kept that money.
I don't know what tape you're referring to, George. I saw media reports that Tom Homan accepted a bribe. There's no evidence of that. And here's, George, why fewer and fewer people watch your program and why you're losing credibility, because you're talking for now 5 minutes with the Vice President of the United States about this story regarding Tom Homan, a story that I've read about, but I don't even know the video that you're talking about. Meanwhile, low-income women can't get food because the Democrats and Chuck Schumer have shut down the government. Right now, we're trying to figure out how to pay our troops because Chuck Schumer has shut down the government. Let's talk about the real issues, George. I think the American people would benefit much more from that than from you going down some weird left-wing rabbit hole where the facts clearly show that Tom Homan didn't engage in any criminal wrongdoing.
It's not a weird left-wing rabbit hole. I didn't insinuate anything. I asked you whether Tom Homan accepted $50,000, as was heard on an audio tape recorded by the FBI in September 2024, and you did not answer the question. Thank you for your time this morning.
No, George, I said that I don't.
Up next, we'll be right back.
Look, there's been a transparency issue with our current administration, so it's hard to know anything with any type of certainty. So don't feel bad, but to our understanding, there was $50,000 that exchanged hands, and Stephanopoulos just simply was asking him, does he still have the money that we saw him take on tape?
Or did he give it back?
And J.D. Vance was like, that is ridiculous. He didn't take a bribe. Stephanopoulos is like, I didn't ask you if you took a bribe. Those are different things. And he's like, Stephanopoulos, that's why no one watches your show. That is an ad hominem. Are you attacking me? I'm not talking about me. It was every.
Right. And Tom Homan has been had death threats as a result of this, and then which is
the emotion.
The appeal to the emotion.
Red herring. It was insane.
Well, it's important for all of us to, I think, remember that today as we try to wade our way and navigate through some of these political discussions. I guess, I don't know, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, though, is that I just don't know that people are willing to have their minds opened because they're so dug into their position.
I think we have a new responsibility, not just people in the media, but people, from just a very ground level curriculum standpoint when it comes to education, to talk about these things, because the way we're connected through globalization has a new threat to us on how something can be misinterpreted, misconstrued. Our politics weren't so accessible at one point, but now they are. And I think we have just a new responsibility. I think, and I'll say this too, journalists have typically been pretty good at this, but they are getting pushed out of the attention economy in some ways.
Right.
We much would rather listen to somebody like maybe me. I'm not a journalist, right? I'm not trained to be a journalist. So I think folks like myself who are garnering this, these eyes have a responsibility to understand these fallacies.
All right, let's get back to some of these issues of the day. And I think it is interesting because the more you rely on data, I love that. And you made a great distinction there, because I do think in a lot of ways what you do, Josh, is journalism. It's exposing facts and trying to educate people to what is the truth. So you may not give yourself that credit, but I think you should. And I think it's interesting that you at least have even touched on it. But this is one of those issues, I guess, that beyond the data, you touched on it earlier, that what was it, 80% think the Epstein files should be released. I guess this is where just sort of your analysis would come in. And why do you think this issue has taken on the life that it has? I can't remember a whiplash moment where everyone in politics was on one side, and then in a matter of a minute, everybody had flipped to the other and said, yeah, release it. What do you think is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, the flip was a direct result. The flip, at least from the GOP leadership, was a direct result of them realizing that it was futile because so many people wanted to see the files. Why do I think so many people want to see the files, and why do I think so many people care about this? We were just in focus groups, and I did a virtual focus group of folks in Ohio. And one of the men in the focus groups said, this isn't about Trump, and it's actually not that much about Jeffrey Epstein as a person. This is just about the Epstein class. This is about big, wealthy, well-connected billionaires that take from our wealth, and we feel like we're behind the curtain, and we want to see behind the curtain. And that is a bipartisan feeling.
Right. Well, it didn't sound like it last night on CNN.
Well, I think that that's the top of the Republican Party, which I really feel like the GOP leaders understand that they are connected with that wealthy and well-connected class. And I think that they're afraid, to basically piss off some of their friends.
Yeah. Well, someone on the panel made the point that this is really more, everyone's going to get dinged on this, it sounds like, right? Which is why it really isn't necessarily a political thing.
No.
This is an everyone thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, they've been talking about how Bill Clinton has acted in some inappropriate ways, and that might be in the files. There might be some other Democrats. I personally say, I mean, I don't have any allegiance to a party that would supersede my allegiance to the victims of a crime. I mean, so I would just hope that everybody would feel that way. And it seems like most people do feel that way.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what to make of it, Josh. I really don't. I don't know why Trump and the Republicans fought so hard to not release it after saying they would. And I don't know why Democrats wouldn't have released it when they had the opportunity. I don't know why. I guess because it is just so potentially explosive. On the other hand, I don't know really what we'll see, right? I mean, I don't know whether this stuff's being redacted like mad right now, whether there are parts of this file that are disappearing, if you know what I mean. I don't know what we'll ultimately see in the end.
I talked to Representative Rokana about this. He him and Massey were the people who put the bill on the floor. And he assures me that the lawyers of the victims have a very, very good grasp of what's in those files. And that if what gets released is redacted in any real way, then, they'll let us know.
Fill in the blanks.
The thing I'm worried about is not so much the files being damaged or changed. It is the open investigation that Pam Bondi has started into a couple of folks. Because
you think that might give them an out to delay the release of it? Is that right?
They have a legal basis then, even if the bill passes the House and the Senate goes in the White House, they have a legal basis to hold on to some of the files if there's an open investigation. Mm-hmm. And it is not a coincidence that Pam Bondi releases a memo in July and says, I've gone through the files, there's no need to have any new open investigations. And then the day after Donald Trump tweets, we should open an investigation into Bill Clinton. Months later, there'll be open investigation into Bill Clinton. So I think that's a legal strategy, and I think it could have some impact.
Yeah, this is kind of one of those I'll believe it when I see it things. I don't know. And again, maybe that's just the cynic in me. I'm too jaded after all these years in journalism, but we'll see. Let's talk about the data of what does the data say about President Trump? Can we take from the most recent election in Virginia and New Jersey and elsewhere that the voters have spoken, so to speak, but his approval numbers are down. He's at what I think 38%.
38, 39, yeah.
How much? 33. What does the data say about where we are right now with this president? And I know there was some talk again last night on the show you were on about the lame duck status of Donald Trump.
Yeah, we might be at that stage. His approval rating is pretty low, but I wouldn't say it's significantly lower than where it usually hovers around. I mean, Donald Trump has been really good at taking broad unpopularity and turning it into electoral wins, but he is a very unpopular American, despite the loudest MAGA person But he's been able to turn that into electoral wins for himself. I think the data on the economy are the ones that are pulling him down the most. 73%, I believe, 73% of Americans say that they're spending more on groceries today than they were this time last year. 54% of Americans say the same about healthcare. And his big beautiful bill is going to kick 12 million people off of their healthcare. So it's not going to be great for him when he keeps making life less affordable for people.
This is something I'm sure you can lend your expertise to, Josh, and that is that, to me, Republicans have always been just so much better at messaging than Democrats. And this is a prime example, right? Things in the economy are not going as well, but you wouldn't think that maybe if you listen to the Republican message. Whereas at the end of when we were going into the 24 election with Harris and Trump, Democrats were afraid to say things were getting better. Things were getting better, but they still, prices were still up. So they didn't say it. There wasn't a message. And that's part of what cost them that election, along with immigration. Yeah.
I think I am hesitant to just steer all the way into Republicans are better at messaging, mainly because they just have such a different job. And I don't even want to say Republic. I'll say conservatives, because conservatives used to be Democrats, now they're Republicans. Wherever there have been conservatives, like real conservatives in this country, their job has not really been to build. Their jobs have not been to create. Of late, their jobs have been to destroy. Right? There were time periods where conservatives weren't just in destruction mode, but that is where they are now. And so when you're just criticizing and you're just saying what's wrong, it's a lot easier to garner support, right? When you're just a critic. Whereas I think like where a lot of progressives in history, whether they be in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, when they had a different job, to venture out, to say, what if we had the VA? What if we had the 40-hour work week? What if we had Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security? These things were not popular at first, right? It's just a harder thing to message. It's harder to get people to believe that there could be more than what they got. And so I just think that they have different jobs.
Well, you have a master's in economics. Explain to me how other countries are paying us billions of dollars in tariffs. And this goes to the bigger challenge for me, is understanding some of the economic issues of the day.
Yeah, to make it really simple, a tariff is a tax. Whether Trump wants to redefine it or not, the economics are very clear on that. A tariff is a tax on imported goods, right? So, and it's a tax that gets passed on to the American consumer. If you have a product that is getting imported to Walmart for a certain amount from a certain country, if we tariff that country is still going to import that good at basically at the same amount. Walmart is going to have to pay that tax. And
it's not like these countries are paying the tariff before the cargo ship leaves the country.
No, you are paying the tariff because the product, Walmart has to pay more, and then Walmart charges you more.
But Trump says we're making billions of dollars on tariffs from other countries.
Well, we wouldn't know. He hasn't released the economic data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 3 months because he's afraid of the unemployment rates and the inflation rates. We had 12 consecutive months of growing GDP. Before the Trump administration start, we had our first negative in his first quarter. And right now, economists are saying that we might have another negative in this financial quarter. If we had two back-to-back, that it would have been a recession. So I don't know. It's hard to believe anything with Donald Trump said.
Well, this is you've just hit on another issue that I really find challenging. And that is, where's the money? I mean, we're taught in journalism school to follow the money. I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, how much did DOGE save in the end? How many federal employees were cut? If we're saving all this money, why isn't the debt going down? I mean, the last I checked, it was 38 trillion and growing. How much is all this immigration enforcement costing? To me, I'm having a real hard time getting my head around the finances, the economics of what's happening right now.
I got answers for you. How much is immigration enforcement costing? $29 billion for to actually round them up, and $34 billion for detention centers. It's going to be somewhere around $74 billion over the next 4 years. You said about the national debt, it doesn't seem like it's going down. In fact, it's actually going to go up $4 trillion over the next 10 years because of Trump's big, beautiful bill. So the answer is the money is coming. It's called upward redistribution. Right? Very rich people are getting tax cuts. The working class are not getting their wages raised at all. And so the money is getting consolidated at the top. The word is oligarchy. We are at a near oligarch state in America.
All right. Well, how much why are we not hearing more about DOGE and how much we saved? Because it had to be something. How about all these people that have been laid off? I mean, I don't know, because there really hasn't been any official number. The last time the number came out about jobs, the guy got fired, right?
Yeah, they just fired the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yeah, I said this when I was on the show last time. Trump just thinks he can fire himself into being a good economist. And that has been my principal concern with him, is not so much that I think he's racist or sexist, and he's given reason to feel that way. But my principal concern with him is that I always thought he was a bad economist.
All right. Well, having said all of that, Josh, let me ask you why Democrats are so unpopular, right? I mean, what was the last I think I saw? They were polling at what? It was under 30%, I think, favorability. Am I wrong on that?
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know the party as a whole, but I know I know they're unpopular. Democrats are unpopular because Democrats are very afraid to criticize the very systems that people say that they're experiencing pain from. have a deep affinity for Vice President Harris. I owe a decent amount of my career to her. I worked on her staff earlier in my career. She ran as a candidate that was averse to the retrenchment of the status quo. She stood in front of some very, very powerful structures that are not working for people. And I think she was put in a difficult position because she was already in the Biden administration. But at the end of the day, people were looking at their economic conditions that hadn't gotten better. And Democrats were telling them, look at the GDP, look at the unemployment rate, look at the inflation rate, it's all going down. None of those macroeconomic stats might mean anything if people can't afford gas and groceries. And I think that's where Democrats continue to mess up.
All right, this leads to another really important issue, and it's a question I'd love to ask you because I look at these things from 30,000 feet, Josh, and you, I'm sure, will say, yeah, I've already thought about that, and so have a lot of other people who are way smarter than I am. But what's the difference between the Republican populism that lifted Trump and the Democratic socialism that's lifting people like Mamdani, who just won in New York?
In spirit, nothing. In spirit, nothing. In policy, there's different. There are some differences, but in spirit,
right,
there is no difference. To the everyday person, there is an anti-establishment energy that has been growing on both sides of these parties. Donald Trump tapped into it from the right. Mamdani, Yang, Bernie Sanders have tapped into it from the left.
All right, so that's the question. And again, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but isn't government pretty much socialism? I mean, it's become a bad word, I guess, but in the end, we all pay in and we all, for the most part, are supposed to benefit from where the money goes. What am I missing here?
Yeah. So when we're talking about a socialist approach like Mamdani's, what he's trying to do very slowly is have government take control of what they call the means of production. Right. And so that is like, I think a good example is his idea for a city-owned grocery store, right? One that doesn't have profit margins as its ultimate goal, kind of like USPS, right? You never think about how you can send a piece of mail to Arkansas for $1 and some change, right? It's because that is a government program that doesn't have profit margins at its end of the day, right? And so Mamdani and some other socialist thinkers want to create more opportunities for people to access goods and services that are being given to them without profit margins at the very center of them. And that's where I say in policy, it's a little different because Donald Trump's of the world will come with the populist energy, but then they are saying you need government to do less. You need government to take away these social programs, SNAP, Medicare, and Medicaid, while he also redistributes wealth to the rich.
Well, the difference with Mamdani, I think, is that part of it, I don't know where the line is drawn as far as, on one end, he wants to get rid of capitalism, and on the other end, he wants to give people free transportation. Some of the stuff, again, you can understand why. Again, to your point, when you look at this direction we seem to be heading with the wealth distribution, you can see where people are like, hey, what am I getting out of it? What are these guys doing for me, for the little guy, right? And that's how a Mamdani and how a Trump can win.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think I don't like this idea that you're either a fan of capitalism or socialism or communism. I think that there's room for a lot of the ideals that exist in all of these economic structures to be in a functionalist society. I will say, though, as a capitalistic society and as a person who genuinely I enjoy capitalism, it has to work better. It simply has to work. It is hard to scare people away from socialism when they cannot afford gas and groceries. If you don't want people to lean into a new imagination of how our society and the means of production can be handled and distributed, capitalism needs to work a lot better than what it is doing now. And right now, we barely even have capitalism. What we have is corporatism. Capitalism inspires competition. It wants businesses to be propped up to drive down prices. corporatism is when large corporations work with governments to collude and monopolize things. And that's where we are. And it is not working for people.
Yeah. Last issue I want to touch on here is you had a post about Michigan Governor Whitmer stepping in to save some of the policies the Trump administration is cutting. And I think in your words, you said something about how many times are we going to save people from their votes? Explain where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, look, I think our votes are complex, right? When you pick a candidate, you pick a buffet of issues and stances on those issues, and I don't expect some person to be perfect on them. But there are some social programs that are upholding society. Social Security is one of them. Medicaid and Medicare and SNAP are not because you're on them, but because when more people are on them, they drive down your healthcare prices, right? SNAP has a correlative relationship with a reduction in crime. It's not rocket science. When people have food and they're fed, they're less likely to crime other people, right? Mm-hmm. These are things that we have put into society that are holding us up. And election after election after election, Republican voters are voting for candidates who are saying, I want to get rid of these programs. And I think at some point, we are going to have to hold those voters to what they say they want. What ends up happening is people in these red states like Texas, they don't take the income tax. They go get it from the federal government. Well, they're getting it from the blue states and the red. Right. They're getting it from the New Yorks and the Illinois, and then they're funding the same programs with it. You got to either vote for it or actually go without it at some point.
I don't remember if I saw it on your feed or somewhere else, but someone suggested that maybe counties that vote in favor of these programs that are cutting.
That was me.
Was that you? Okay, yeah.
That was me.
So explain what you meant by that. It was interesting. I'm sure it'll never happen, but it's an interesting thought.
It'll never happen. But essentially some counties are saying we want to be taxed. And we don't want to be taxed, but we want our tax dollars to go towards these programs. And some counties are saying we don't. The counties that are saying they do should then enjoy those programs. The counties that are saying they don't shouldn't. But what happened in Michigan wasn't that. The state came out in the election and overwhelmingly voted for Republicans and for Donald Trump, who said, I am going to cut your health care. And Governor Whitmer, their Democratic governor, stepped in and said, not on my watch. How many more times are we going to have Democrats save? Because the majority of people that are in the ACA marketplace are actually Republicans. They're the ones that are using the programs the most. Mm-hmm. And they keep getting saved by Democratic politics that they're voting away.
Well, we both just said here that it'll never happen, but in a way it is happening, isn't it? I mean, President Trump has control of who gets what money, and he's already withholding some money, at least, to states that don't follow what he wants to happen.
It's happening in a way for sure. I mean, and that's like my nightmare for a president to do it. Because there's a significant, like, you are presiding over the entire country, but like on a state and county level, I think it maybe would, one, show people the effectiveness of their vote. When you're in Cook County and you got something that county don't got, well, you guys didn't vote for it. Mm-hmm. But also, I think that there's something that is really intently democratic about it. I mean, you got to decide whether or not you wanted mental health services in your county. And you said no. And so you don't get them.
All right, leave us with some good news, Josh. I don't know, you pick it. Something you've done recently, some polling you've done recently, maybe something that we can all latch onto here to make ourselves smarter and less angry, I guess.
Yesterday was actually a good day, despite, the rifts Scott and I got into. We saw, I don't know the last time I've seen, let's say like a Jasmine Crockett and a Marjorie Taylor Greene step in the lower chamber and vote the same way. I mean, I didn't think that things like that were possible in our politics. And I think for a good reason, too. The Republican Party is attracting a lot more young men. This is just a statistical fact, right? And I think that they had a responsibility to respond to issues like transparency around sexual assault by saying, we want these things to be out. And it was actually encouraging to see them step up and say, we got a lot of young men that are watching us and how we're going to handle an issue like this, something that disadvantaged young women, and they voted unanimously to be transparent about it. I thought that was good.
I do think I think we're a lot closer on a lot of issues than it appears, Josh. I really do. When you get people in the same room and talk about what's important to everyone, I really think we're a lot closer than we are farther apart. And I'm just really sad that we're as divided and angry and now violent about where we stand politically on things.
When I sit in focus groups with folks, I see it all the time. We'll do a focus groups of people who vote one way. Then we'll do another focus group another way. They're saying the same things. They're trying to get their different ways. I think, guns is a good example. You got people who are like, I feel unsafe. That's why I got to have a gun. That's why I think that we should strengthen we should allow people to get guns. Someone else like, I feel unsafe. That's why they got to take away the guns. We're trying to get to the same place where people just want to feel safe. They want to be fed. They want to provide for their families. And I think we can find our way to get there.
That wasn't on your face last night on CNN.
Scott gets me in rare form sometimes.
The cutaways of you, Josh, man, you were throwing some side eye at people.
There was some crazy stuff said last night. I tried to hold it in. I'm gonna have to talk to the camera people and keep me.
But in a way though, it's beautiful because you didn't have to say anything. They just showed you. What did you say your grandma would have said about that?
He said, "Fix your face, boy. Boy, fix your face." Oh, sorry. What?
Oh man. Hey, Josh, listen, it's been great to chat with you. I really appreciate the time. Congratulations on all the success, and I'll continue to watch you on your social platforms. You're doing a great job, and you're doing important work for folks who, again, are hoping to get smarter. And it's a great spot to do just that on your page. Josh, thanks again.
Appreciate you. Thanks for having me on.
My thanks to Josh. One other note, the day after we recorded, Josh was named to the Root 100 list, honoring the best in Black achievement. On the list, Kendrick Lamar, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Beyonce, Denzel Washington, and yes, Joshua Doss. Although he joked that his picture was right next to Michael B. Jordan, so you might have overlooked him. I appreciate him spending some time with me. You can find him at Doss Discourse on Instagram. I can't thank Brian Griggs enough from Brian Griggs Productions. He's our audio engineer and editor. The original music is from my friend Chicago vibraphonist Thaddeus Tukes, and I asked Bill Curtis for a favor. He was kind enough to lend his legendary voice to the introduction each episode. I'm Joe Donlin. I will see you on CBS News Chicago. It's available everywhere on the CBS News app. And as always, I thank you for listening to Chicago Unscripted.